Okay, let's talk about our last module of reading, which is module 7 here. So module 7 is going to cover three different sections in our notes. So we have trophic levels, energy flow, the 10% rule that goes along with energy flow, and then we have food chains and food webs, which kind of go together. So an important key note here is what I wanted to point this out right here. So ecosystems depend on energy flowing through and matter cycling around trophic levels. So energy and matter cycling are the two most important things in an ecosystem. That's what they depend upon. And so that's what we're going to be covering in this module. So make sure you've read through, that you understand what these different questions are. I think you've learned about food chains since you were in kindergarten. That's one of the first science topics that you actually learn about. So you need to understand each of these terms. You also need to understand the cycle. This has to do more with like that cycling of energy, so make sure that you understand that. Again, more terms over here that you need to know. One thing I want to point out about the 10% rule, the 10% rule states that about 10% of energy on average is passed on from one trophic level to the next. If you noticed, I said the word on average. That's not a hard, fast rule. You could have 4% of the energy moving on from one level to the next, or you could have 18% of energy moving on from one level to the next. But on average, it's about 10%. So we just, in general, say 10%. That's when we're just talking about ecosystems. If we really wanted to measure something, we could do an experiment and do that, but we're not actually doing that. We're just in general talking. So on average, it's about 10%. The rest of the energy where does the rest of the energy go? Because we know from the laws of thermodynamics that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So energy just isn't lost. It doesn't go somewhere. Well, what happens is, because of life, because of us having a metabolism essentially, we end up organisms in general generate a lot of heat. And so a lot of that energy is going to be used and then transformed into heat. And so when we say that it's lost as heat, we don't mean that it's actually physically gone, like it doesn't disappear poof magically. It turns into heat, and then heat cannot be used for anything else essentially. So the body heat that's coming off of all of us as we're just sitting here doing not much, but our body's working on the inside, that heat, we're not capturing that heat and using it for anything. And that's what we mean by lost as heat. Okay, another key concept over here is that it's actually more efficient to eat lower on the food chain than it is higher on the food chain. And so they'll explain that in more detail here. So make sure you're paying attention to that. And a key point as we move into this next section is right here, this other red sentence that says food webs contain multiple interconnected food chains. So that's how I like to think about food webs. They're just a bunch of chains kind of stuck together. And they also end up with feedback loops in their systems. And so it's important that we need to talk about what a feedback loop is. We're actually going to talk about that in class. We've got some sketch notes that we're going to do on feedback loops. There's 2 types of feedback loops. You need to know each, and you should know some examples of those. We will practice those in class, but those are called positive and negative feedback loops. One really important thing, and we're watching a video on this, is the Yellowstone ecosystem. Yellowstone, this is great because this particular ecosystem demonstrates like everything that we've just talked about here in Unit 1, all of Unit 1. So this is a really good thing to study and be able to explain to somebody from Unit 1 as you're studying, okay? So that's that, and then here's your Module 7 review. And then just to kind of point out, at the end of every module, they'll have you practice some different science skills. There will be some AP practice questions, and then there will be pursuing environmental solutions. Again, a large portion, 20 to 25%, maybe even a little bit higher percent of the test is going to be on coming up with environmental solutions or answering questions about environmental solutions. So I think it's a great idea to actually look at some of these environmental solutions and kind of read through those. Again, you don't need to memorize them, but that is there for you as some examples. Here's the vocab that you need to know from Unit 1. And then lots of questions that go along with this. And there you go. The answers to this practice exam these are in the back of the book. So you should be able to find the answers with those to see how well you did. And that is all. And if you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to me in class or during Pathways time. Talk to you guys later.